The lock on the basement door was fastened from the outside. I stood there in the dark hallway staring at it, and my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. A padlock, a heavy-duty master padlock, the kind you'd use on a storage unit or a garden shed, threaded through a latch that had been screwed into the door frame recently from the look of it. The wood around the screws was still pale and raw. I called 911 right then. I didn't think, I just dialed. While I waited, I pressed my ear against the door and listened. Nothing at first. Then, a sound. Faint. A slow, rhythmic scraping. Like someone dragging their fingers across concrete. I should back up. My name is Eugene. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as an insurance adjuster for a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio, which is exactly as exciting as it sounds. I like fishing. I like college football. I make a decent pot of chili. I'm not a dramatic man, and I have never in my life wanted a dramatic story to tell. My wife's name is Miriam. We met when we were both 24 at a church picnic that neither of us particularly wanted to attend. She laughed at something I said. I don't even remember what, and that was it for me. 43 years. 2 kids. 1 house with a leaky gutter I kept meaning to fix. Our son Darren lives in Phoenix. He calls on Sundays, licks in Phoenix. He calls on Sundays. He's steady, dependable, a little boring. I say that with nothing but love, because boring fathers raise boring sons, and boring sons don't break your heart. Our daughter, Renee, is a different story. Renee is 40 years old. She has her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness, and a talent for making you feel like whatever went wrong was somehow your fault. She married a man named Todd when she was 32. Todd sells commercial real estate. Todd is very white teeth and a firm handshake, and I have never once trusted him, which is something I kept to myself for 8 years because Miriam loved Renee, and I loved Miriam. They bought a house about 40 minutes from us, out past Westerville. Nice neighborhood, good schools, though they didn't have children. Todd said they were focused on building financial stability first. I smiled and nodded and thought about how that phrase didn't mean anything. For a long time, things were fine. Not close exactly. Renee and I had never been close the way she and Miriam were, but civil. Holiday dinners, birthday calls, the normal machinery of a family that's functioning without anyone examining it too carefully. Then Miriam got sick. It was a Tuesday in February when she got the diagnosis. Early stage Parkinson's. The doctor was kind about it, methodical, walked us through what to expect. Miriam sat very straight in the chair across from his desk and asked good questions, the kind I wasn't thinking clearly enough to ask. On the drive home, she held my hand and looked out the window and said, "Well, we'll figure it out." That was Miriam. 50 words when most people would use 500. The first year was manageable. Medication helped. She had tremors in her left hand, some fatigue, occasional balance issues, but she was still herself, still gardening, still doing the crossword, still burning exactly 1 piece of toast every single morning and refusing to admit it was a pattern. I retired early to be home with her. We adjusted. Renee started coming around more. I want to be careful here because I don't know, I genuinely don't know when the concern became calculation. Maybe it never was concern. Maybe I'm being too charitable to someone who doesn't deserve it. But at the time, I was grateful. She came on weekends. She drove Miriam to appointments when I had my own medical stuff going on. She sat with her mother in the garden and talked. It was Todd who first mentioned the money. He brought it up the way he brought everything up, casually, as though it had just occurred to him, as though it wasn't something he'd been working toward. We were in my kitchen. He was leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee, and he said, "You know, Eugene, you and Miriam have done really well for yourselves. It might be worth thinking about asset protection. There are strategies, perfectly legal, that can help you pass things along to the kids without the estate taking a hit." I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. 2 months later, he brought it up again. This time Renee was there, and she jumped in, gently, carefully, saying they weren't trying to rush anything. They just cared about our security. They wanted to make sure everything was protected. Miriam said she appreciated it. I watched Todd's face while Miriam was talking. He was already counting. I want to be precise about the timeline because precision matters. March, Todd presents me with paperwork from an estate planning attorney I've never met. He says the attorney is a friend of a client, very reputable, and that this is just a preliminary document to establish intent. I don't sign it. I say I want my own attorney to look at it first. April, Renee calls, upset, says I'm being paranoid. Says she and Todd are trying to help, and it hurts her that I don't trust them. I apologize. I do not give them the paperwork back. May, Miriam has a difficult month, 2 falls, a night in the hospital. She's okay, but it shakes us both. Renee steps up. More visits, more help. I'm exhausted and grateful, and I lower my guard. June, I sign over power of attorney to Renee for medical decisions only at Miriam's request because Miriam trusts her and I trust Miriam. That was my mistake. Not the only one, but the first real one. July, Renee suggests that Miriam might be more comfortable staying with her and Todd for a few weeks. The drive to her specialist would be shorter, she says. Todd has the guest room already set up. It would give me a chance to rest. I said no initially. Miriam said she wanted to try it. I let her go on a Friday afternoon. I helped her pack a bag. I kissed her goodbye in the driveway. She squeezed my hand and said she'd call me that evening. She didn't call that evening. Renee said Miriam was tired from the drive and had gone to bed early. I asked to speak with her and Renee said she was asleep and she'd have her call me in the morning. In the morning, Renee said Miriam had a rough night and was resting. That afternoon, she said Miriam had a doctor's appointment and she'd call when they were back. That evening, nothing. I told myself I was overreacting. Miriam was sick. She needed rest. Renee was taking care of her. I was hovering, which was exactly what everyone said I did too much of. I waited 3 more days. I called again. Renee answered on the 4th ring and said Miriam was having a good day, that she'd eaten well and done some light walking, and that she'd asked Renee to tell me not to worry. I said I wanted to come see her. Renee said maybe next weekend would be better, that the routine was helping and disrupting it might set her back. I said okay. I don't know why I said okay. I think I was afraid of being difficult. I think I'd spent so many years being told I was overprotective, suspicious, not trusting enough, and I'd started to believe it. Another week passed. Darren called from Phoenix and asked how Mom was doing. I told him what I knew, which wasn't much. He said, "Dad, that doesn't sound right." He said it matter-of-factly, the way engineers talk, and something about hearing it from someone else made it land differently. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bedroom that smelled like Miriam's lotion and had her reading glasses on the nightstand where she'd left them, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about how I hadn't actually heard her voice in 11 days. 11 days. I got up at 6 in the morning and drove to Westerville. I didn't call ahead. I want to be honest about that. I didn't call because some part of me, some part I hadn't let myself listen to, knew that if I called, they'd find a reason for me not to come. It was a Saturday, a little after 8. The street was quiet. Their house, a colonial with a 2-car garage and one of those manicured lawns that looks like it's trying too hard, looked normal from the outside. Todd's car was in the driveway. Renee's was gone. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Todd opened the door in a way that was almost natural. Almost. He said, "Eugene, hey, Renee's out. She just went to get groceries." I said, "I want to see my wife." He said Miriam was resting. He said she'd had a hard night. He started to say something about the routine again, and I walked past him into the house. I'm not a large man. I'm 67 years old, and I have a bad knee, and I spent my career sitting at a desk. But I walked past Todd like he was furniture, and I called Miriam's name. Nothing from upstairs. Nothing from the living room or the kitchen. Then I heard it, from a door near the back of the hallway, a door I'd assumed led to a utility room or storage. I heard that sound. Slow, rhythmic, scraping. I tried the handle. Locked. I looked at the door frame, the padlock, the raw wood. I looked at Todd, who had followed me down the hallway, and his face had gone the particular kind of still that people's faces go when they know they've been caught and their brain is still running calculations. I called 911. Todd tried to talk to me while we waited. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said Miriam had been confused, that she'd had an episode and for her own safety. I turned away from him and pressed my hand flat against that door and said, "Miriam, it's Eugene. I'm here. The police are coming." The scraping stopped. Then, very faint, barely enough to hear, "Gene, 23 minutes. That's how long it took for the first patrol car to arrive. I have never in my life experienced 23 minutes the way I experienced those 23 minutes. I didn't move from that door. I talked to her through it. About nothing. About the drive over, about the gutter I'd finally gotten fixed, about the fishing trip I'd been planning for when she was feeling better. I just kept talking so she would know I was there. When the officers broke the lock and opened the door, I had to grab the wall. The room was a finished basement, carpeted, with a small window near the ceiling that had been covered with black paper taped along the edges, a cot, a space heater, a mini fridge, a plastic tub in the corner that I won't describe, a chain, not like a horror movie chain, but a long cable lock, the kind cyclists use, threaded through a ring bolt that had been drilled into the wall, and on the other end of it, a cuff around my wife's ankle. Miriam was sitting on the edge of the cot. She was thin in a way that frightened me. Her hair was unbrushed. She had a bruise on a forearm, old and yellowing, but she looked at me when I came through that door, and her eyes were clear and sharp, and I knew she was still in there, still herself, and I sat down next to her on that cot, and I put my arms around her, and I felt her shake. She hadn't been starved. The mini fridge had food, water, but she'd been isolated, kept from her medications on certain days, Renee would later admit. To make her seem more confused at doctor's appointments they'd selectively taken her to in an attempt to have her declared incompetent. There was paperwork, already filed, that listed Todd as her financial decision-maker under a power of attorney document that bore Miriam's signature. Miriam told investigators she did not remember signing it. The signature had been notarized by a woman who worked in Todd's office. I want to tell you what I found out over the following weeks because people deserve to understand how something like this actually works. It isn't dramatic, it isn't like the movies, it's paperwork, it's incremental. It's someone who is very patient and organized and willing to do things slowly so that each individual step seems almost reasonable. Renee and Todd had spent approximately 14 months building a case to have Miriam declared legally incapacitated. They had medical records, real ones, pulled legitimately from her doctors, supplemented with notes from appointments where they described her symptoms as more severe than they were. They had a financial advisor they'd introduced into Miriam's life, presenting him as a family friend who had quietly moved $214,000 from a joint investment account into a new account they controlled, $214,000. Miriam's mother had left her $180,000 when she died in 2019. The rest was what we'd saved over 4 decades. Money for retirement, for medical care, for whatever we'd need at the end of our lives. It was gone. Todd had also taken out a home equity line of credit against our house in my name and Miriam's, using the fraudulent power of attorney document. $86,000. He'd made 3 payments to keep it current so we wouldn't get bank notices. When investigators found his laptop, they found spreadsheets, organized, color-coded spreadsheets tracking every transfer, every document, every step of the plan with projected timelines and contingency notes. He had a column labeled E-Concerns that was me, with notes on how to manage my suspicions. Things like deflect with caregiver guilt and reinforce family narrative, and if escalates, invoke Miriam's preference. I sat in an investigator's office and read those spreadsheets, and I felt something I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't just anger. It was the sensation of discovering that something you trusted was hollow, that the weight you'd felt was fake weight, that what you'd thought was solid had been paper all along. Renee was arrested on a Tuesday. Todd was arrested the same day at his office. I didn't watch. I didn't want to. Darren flew in from Phoenix that week. He sat with me in the hospital where Miriam was being treated. She had a UTI that had gone untreated, a vitamin deficiency, muscle weakness from limited mobility, and we didn't talk much. He's not a talker. Neither am I, really. We watched a Buckeyes game on the room's small television, with the volume low and Miriam asleep between us, and that was enough. There are things I've thought about a lot since then. I've thought about the moment Renee walked into my kitchen 8 months earlier with a casserole dish and a warm smile and told me I needed to take better care of myself. I thought about whether she felt anything, any hesitation, any flicker of what used to be there, or whether she'd moved so far past it that it was just logistics by then. I thought about the phone call I got from her attorney shortly after her arrest, in which she suggested through him that she had concerns about my behavior during the marriage that she might raise in her defense, that she would construct whatever narrative was useful to her. Even then, even at the bottom of everything, she was still calculating. I've thought about what I would have found if I hadn't gone on that Saturday morning, if I'd waited another week, talked myself out of it one more time, believed one more story about routines and rest. I try not to think about that too long. Miriam came home on a Thursday in late October. The leaves were down. She walked up the front path holding my arm. She needs a walker now. The months had taken something. And when we got to the door, she stopped and looked at the garden, which was dormant but still there, the rose canes cut back and mulched the way she taught me. She said, "You did the roses." I said I'd watched her do it enough times. She patted my hand. Inside, I'd gotten the gutter fixed. I'd had the heating system serviced. I'd put fresh flowers on the kitchen table, sunflowers because she likes yellow. And I stood there while she moved slowly through the rooms of our house, touching things. And I understood that she was making sure it was all still real. It was real. The legal process is ongoing. Both Renee and Todd have been charged with elder abuse, financial fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and several other counts that their lawyers are busy negotiating down. The $214,000 is largely unrecoverable, spent, hidden, laundered through the real estate business in ways that will take years to untangle. The home equity line is a lien we're fighting. We've retained our own attorney, a woman named Patricia, who has the energy of someone who has never in her life let anything go, which is exactly what we need. I don't know what I feel about Renee. That's the honest answer. I know what I felt at the height of it. Fury, grief, a kind of bewildered sorrow that the child I raised could have become someone capable of this. I know what I feel on the days when Miriam wakes up frightened because she's dreaming of that room. I know what I feel when I watch my wife move a little more carefully now, a little more quietly, as though she's not entirely sure the floor will hold her. What I want other people to take from this, and I've thought hard about whether it's even my place to say it, is that it happens slowly. Nobody wakes up one morning to find their life has been taken. It happens in steps, small concessions, logical-sounding explanations, the slow accumulation of trust given to someone who is using it as a tool. Watch for the paperwork you didn't ask for. Watch for the attorney you've never met. Watch for the person who keeps telling you that your instincts are wrong. Your instincts are not wrong. I drove 40 minutes on a Saturday morning because something in me said go. I almost talked myself out of it 4 times on the drive. I almost turned around twice. I didn't turn around twice. I didn't turn around. I found my wife. That's the whole story, and I'm still not sure I have the words for it. Some mornings I make coffee and I listen to Miriam moving around in the bedroom, and I think about how close it came to being a completely different story. Not this one. One where I waited too long, trusted too much, let myself be managed into passivity by someone who had studied exactly how to do it. I don't know what happens with the trial. I don't know what sentence they'll get, or whether justice will look the way I want it to. What I know is that Miriam is home. She burned her toast this morning, and I didn't say a word about it. I just handed her the butter. If any of this reached you, if you got a voice in your head telling you something isn't right, please don't wait for a better reason. Drive the 40 minutes, knock on the door. Ask the question you're afraid sounds paranoid. You can always be wrong about it. You cannot always undo waiting. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. More time than I wanted, honestly. The first few weeks after Miriam came home, I didn't sleep well. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and lie there listening to her breathe, just to make sure the sound was still there. People ask me if I'm angry. The answer is yes, but not in the way they expect. The anger I carry isn't loud. It doesn't feel like fire. It feels more like a stone you keep finding in your pocket. You forget it's there, and then your hand closes around it again, and you remember. What I've come to understand is that what Renee and Todd built didn't happen because they were monsters from the beginning. It happened because they made one small choice, and then another, each one a little easier than the last because the one before it had already moved the line. That's how it works. Not a single dramatic decision to become someone terrible, just a slow series of choices, each justified by the one that came before, until you're drilling a bolt into a basement wall and telling yourself it's practical. I think about my own choices too. The times I said okay when I meant no. The times I let myself be talked out of my instincts because I didn't want to be the difficult one. There's a version of this story where I wait another week and another after that, and what gets found in that basement eventually isn't someone I can bring home. The thing about instinct is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, I am your instinct, pay attention. It just makes you restless at 2 in the morning. It just makes you grip the steering wheel a little tighter. It just makes you drive 40 minutes on a Saturday without quite being able to explain why. I drove because I could not drive, and when I got there, I didn't look away from what I found, even when every part of me wanted to. That's the only thing I'll claim any credit for. I didn't look away. Miriam is stronger than I gave her credit for. Stronger than either of us knew, maybe. She's back in the garden now. Not everything she planted is coming back this year, but some of it is, and she moves between the rows in the early morning with a patience I find myself watching from the kitchen window. She doesn't talk about the basement much. When she does, it's factual, matter of fact, the way she's always handled hard things. She is the most clear-eyed person I have ever known, and whatever Renee thought she was taking from her, she didn't take that. What I want to say to anyone watching this who has a voice telling them something is wrong. That voice is information. It's not paranoia. It's not you being difficult or suspicious or unkind. It's your mind processing what your emotions haven't caught up to yet. The people who most want you to ignore that voice are precisely the people you should be listening to it about. Todd had a spreadsheet. He had a column with my name in it and notes on how to manage me. He'd studied me well enough to know my weaknesses, my fear of being too much, my habit of backing down, my tendency to believe the most charitable explanation. He used all of it. What he didn't account for was one Saturday morning when I was tired enough of being managed that I just got in the car. Actions have weight. The weight accumulates. Renee and Todd built something carefully over 14 months, and it collapsed in 23 minutes because the foundation of it was a lie, and lies don't hold load the way people think they do. I found my wife. She burned her toast this morning. I handed her the butter and didn't say a word. That's enough for me.